Okay, this video is going to be a quick one. It's going to be on comparing fractions. So let me move over to here, and it's working. Okay, so we spoke in class. You'll see over here on the right-hand side, these are our fraction strips. All right, so you have to notice that each fraction strip that we have is exactly the same length. All right, it's important to know that each strip is equal to one whole, even though each piece is made up of a different size. We have halves, thirds, fourths, fifths, sixths, eighths, tenths, and twelfths. I know this second one may be a little hard to see. That is half and 1/2 over there. All right. So the first thing we spoke about is just kind of the reasonableness of comparing fractions. When you're looking at two fractions, is there any comparison that we could make without comparing denominators or cross multiplying, which we haven't done yet, or finding common denominators? So let's take a look. If I gave 1/6 and I gave 7/8. What do you notice about each of those fractions? Well, we could start with the 1/6. You look here as all I'm shading is one piece. So one piece is being shaded out of how many in the whole? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, and you'll notice not much, see here, not much is shaded. It's actually closer to, see when we refer to it as, here is the 0, here is your half, and here is your whole. So you want to use that vocabulary now when you're looking at each of these fractions. So when you look at 1/6, we could say, well, it's actually closer to the 0 than it is to the 1/2 or the 1 whole. There's only one piece out of 6. Then you go to 7/8. 7/8 has 7 out of 8 pieces shaded in. So 7/8 is actually closer to 1 whole. So right here, we can say, just by making sense, we could say that 7/8 is greater than 1/6 because 7/8 is closer to a whole and 1/6 is closer to 0. And we spoke that when the numerator and denominator are really close together, it's closer to a whole. And when they're really far apart, it's closer to 0. All right. So I'll erase that one. We could do one more here. If I was comparing 2/10 and let's say 10/12. Well, 2/10, we're going to look at it here, is 2 pieces out of the 10 shaded in. And you'll see, well, I know half would be 5/10. So 2/10 is still closer to 0. And 10/12 is all the way, it's closer to the whole. It's still actually closer to 1 whole. And when you quickly here, you'll see that both fraction bars are on top of each other. That 2/10 we're shading a little amount, 10/12 is almost at the whole. So that means that 2/10 is less than 10/12, or you could say 10/12 is greater than 1 whole. All right. So those are just two quick examples of looking at our fraction our fraction strips and saying, is the fraction closer to 0? Is it closer to half? Or is it closer to 1 whole? So you can get an image in your mind of which fraction is greater than the other. All right. Now, other fractions we may get. Let's see here. If I say 4/6 compared to 2/6, right? What do we notice here? Well, we notice that we have the same denominator. Okay, when you have the same denominator, that's telling you that the size of your piece is the same. So when you look at our fraction strips, all the sixths are exactly the same size. It's a matter of how many of those six are you looking at. So if two people are ordering a pizza pie and both pizza pies have 6 slices, which is greater? Pizza pie, if I eat 4 of those 6 or 2 of those 6? Most of us would say, you'd be right, 4/6. And if you go to your 4/6, we're shading in right there. And 2/6, we're only shading in 2 of those pieces. All right? So when the denominators are the same, you could just look at the numerators. Whichever numerator is greater, that's the greater fraction. But you can only do that when the denominators are the same, because the size of the pieces are the same. So if I was comparing here 6/8 compared to 7/8, right? Which fraction is greater? Well, I know they both have 8 as the denominator, so the size of the piece is exactly the same. So then we could look at the numerator, and 7/8 is greater than 6/8. So this is when you're comparing numerators because your denominators are the same. All right, so I'm going to clear that. Then the third way that we showed today is if you have, I'm going to put 2/5 compared to 2/8. All right. What do we notice here? Well, we notice here that our numerators are the same, but our denominators are different. So that means, if we're talking pizza, that we both have 2 slices. All right. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we have the same amount of pizza, because we don't know how big the slices are. So when you go here, this pizza pie only had 5 slices. This pizza pie had 8. So if we have the same numerator, we go to the denominator. Now, your first instinct, many students make the mistake of just thinking the greater the denominator, the bigger the piece, because 8 is greater than 5. But if we look here at our fraction tiles, and you look at the 1/8, and then you look at the 5th, what would you notice? What do you notice? Which fraction is greater? 1/8? 1/8 or 1/5? Well, if you said 1/5, you'd be correct, because the smaller the denominator, the bigger the piece. The bigger the denominator, the smaller the piece, which makes sense, because if you have a pizza pie and you're only sharing it with 5 people, are the slices going to be bigger if you're just cutting it up for 5 people, or if you're trying to cut it up for 8 people? It would be 5 people. So 2/5 is greater than 2/8, because it's when the numerators are the same, you then look at the denominator. And the denominator, smaller the piece, smaller the denominator, bigger the piece, bigger the denominator, smaller the piece. All right? And if we did one more, let's do, if we did 4/12 and 4/6. Well, both of us have 4 pieces. Our numerators are the same. All right. So what do we have to look at? The denominator. Well, person A over here has 4 pieces, but the pie was shared with 12 people. Over here, he has 4 pieces shared with 6 people. So who's going to get the bigger pieces? The person that's only sharing it with 6 people, because the slices are going to be bigger. If you have to cut it up 12 ways, the pieces will be smaller, and you could look at your fraction number lines over here to help you out. So I'm going to put 4/6 would be greater than 4/12. All right, so that's what we went over in class today on comparing fractions.